And welcome to Sex 101. Sex 101 is created to empower our sexes and relationships. Another week, another great episode for sure. Dating, desire, and dignity. Ancient wisdom on bodies, commerce, and crisis of campus commodification.
Yeah, so there's a little bit more of background, and this is actually a part two of the series, and we are considering the impact of OnlyFans on college campuses, an appropriate topic for Sex 101 podcast.
Indeed, some Mr. make the defense of OnlyFans often includes it's not hurting anyone else, or it's just consenting adults. How would the ancient wisdom respond to this claim that there are no victims beyond the participants?
This is where we need to push back really hard against the individualistic assumptions underlying that defense, because both ancient wisdom and modern social science make clear that sexual ethics isn't just about individual choice, it's about the kind of community and culture we're creating together. The idea that commodified sexuality is victimless only makes sense if you ignore everyone else except the immediate transaction participants. And even then, as we've discussed, the creator herself is being victimized, even if she doesn't realize it yet. Let's start with the communal dimension. The ancient Israelite understanding of sexuality was never purely individual. When the prophets condemned sexual immorality, they weren't just talking about personal sin, they were talking about how individual choices create cultural patterns that affect everyone. Hosea uses the metaphor of prostitution to describe Israel's unfaithfulness to God. For their mother has been unfaithful and has conceived them in disgrace. She said, I will go after my lovers who will give me my food and my water. The prophet is connecting transactional intimacy and the breakdown of covenant community. The early Christian communities understood themselves as corporate bodies where individual choices affected everyone. Paul writes, if one part suffers, every part suffers with it. This wasn't just pious sentiment, it was describing social reality. When members of the community engaged in prostitution, a common feature of Greco Roman cities, it normalized these patterns for others, created demand that exploited vulnerable women, and corrupted the community's witness to a different way of being human. The article provides concrete evidence of downstream effects. It mentions sorority rush now, including whispered subscriber counts the way legacies once compared SAT scores. When OnlyFans become normalized in peer culture, it creates pressure on other students. The young woman who doesn't want to commodify her sexuality now faces questions. Why not? Everyone's doing it. Are you judging us? Don't you need money too? This is what sociologists call norm cascading. Individual choices gradually shift community standards until once unthinkable behavior becomes expected. Aristotle understood that ethics is fundamentally about polis, the community. He writes, man is by nature a political animal, and ethical choices either strengthen or corrupt the common life. Every choice you make is also teaching others what's acceptable, modeling what's normal, and creating culture. The student who starts an OnlyFans account isn't just making a personal choice, she's participating in the normalization of sexual commodification for her entire social network. The Jewish concept of tikkun olam, repair of the world, assumes that individual choices have communal impact. You don't just pursue your own flourishing, you have responsibility for the moral ecology you inhabit. Maimonides writes, every person should see himself as though the entire world is balanced on a scale, and his next action will tip it toward redemption or destruction. That seems dramatic until you realize that cultural change happens exactly this way. One person's choice becomes another's possibilities, becomes a movement, becomes normal. Let's talk about the men purchasing this content. The article focused primarily on the women creating it, but there are millions of men paying for access. What is this doing to them? Ancient wisdom would say we're training themselves to relate to women as objects available for purchase, to expect sexual access in exchange for money, to prefer pixels over persons. Augustine writes about his own use of prostitutes before his conversion. I was not in love, I was in love with love. I sought an object for my love. I was in love with loving. He's describing how transactional sexuality corrupted his very capacity for genuine relationships. Modern research on pornography confirms these ancient insights. Studies show that regular pornography use is associated with decreased relationship satisfaction, increased infidelity, and reduced empathy for women. When you add the interactive, personalized dimension of OnlyFans, where you're not just viewing, but engaging, tipping, and making requests, the parasocial relationship becomes even more distorting. You're training yourself to experience intimacy as something you purchase and control rather than something mutual and vulnerable. Now, think about what happens when these young men eventually enter actual relationships or marriages. They've spent years conditioning their sexuality to require novelty, variety, and complete control, exactly what real intimacy doesn't offer. The wife or girlfriend isn't competing with realistic expectations. She's competing with a carefully curated fantasy that no actual human can match. John Chrysostom addresses this in his era. He who is accustomed to prostitutes can never be satisfied with his wife. The pattern has ancient roots. But it goes beyond individual relationships to societal structures. When a significant percentage of college educated women have supported themselves through OnlyFans, what happens to marriage culture? The article notes that 68% omit it from resumes, meaning they enter marriages carrying secrets, shame, and a sexual history their partners don't know about. The early Christian emphasis on confession and transparency wasn't a prudish concern about sex. It was recognition that relationships built on concealment are fragile. There's also the economic dimension. The article describes how the platform takes a 20% cut forever. We're creating a new permanent class of economic intermediaries who profit from sexual exploitation. OnlyFans Limited generated over $5 billion in revenue in 2023, with much of that coming from young women's desperation to pay for education. Proverbs warns, whoever oppresses the poor shows contempt for their maker. The system isn't oppressing, though, through force, but through exploitation of vulnerability, which ancient wisdom recognized as equally contemptible. The classical philosophers understood that markets can't regulate everything. Aristotle distinguished between oikonomia, household management, and chromatistics, pure wealth accumulation. Some things shouldn't be bought and sold because commodifying them corrupts both buyer and seller. To make money, the measure of all things is to introduce the insatiable desire for more, which destroys both individual character and political community. OnlyFans is pure, reducing sexuality to wealth accumulation with no concern for human cost. What about the consenting adults argument? The ancient tradition would point out that consent alone is an inadequate moral standard. Epictetus teaches men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. Two people can consent to a transaction that degrades them both. The subscriber consents to pay for sexual access that corrupts his capacity for real intimacy. The creator consents to provide it in exchange for money that corrupts her self understanding. Both are worse off for the transaction, even though both consented. The article documents concrete harms beyond the immediate participants, stalking incidents requiring armed response, subscribers driving hours to find creators' homes, and women sleeping with guns because their empowering income has made them targets. These aren't hypotheticals. They are direct consequences of creating a system where men are encouraged to believe sexual access can be purchased and women can be economically incentivized to provide it. There's also intergenerational harm. The article describes high schoolers chanting, "What's wrong with OnlyFans? We're doing it at 18." When college students normalize sexual commodification, they're teaching younger siblings, mentees, and the next generation that this is what empowered womanhood looks like. Deuteronomy commands, "These words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children." Principle works both ways. We're always teaching the next generation something, either wisdom or folly. The early church fathers lived in the Greco Roman world where prostitution was ubiquitous, legal, and socially accepted. Their opposition wasn't because they were sex negative prudes, but because they saw the downstream effects: the exploitation of enslaved women, the corruption of family life, the disease epidemics, and the way it trained men to view women as objects. Lactantius writes, "A society that permits the buying and selling of bodies cannot claim to honor human dignity." That was true in 4th century Rome, and it's true in 21st century America and the modern world. In conclusion, the claim that commodified sexuality is victimless ignores the systemic harm to creators, subscribers, campus culture, relationship norms, and the broader social fabric, harm that ancient wisdom predicted and modern evidence confirms.
Interesting, Mr. Make. The article mentions that administrators terrified the title of complaints look the other way. What is the historical perspective on institutions failing their formative responsibilities?
This is one of the most painful parts of the article because it exposes how institutions explicitly charted for human formation, universities, have become complicit in the exploitation through their silence. The historical perspective here is particularly damning because the very concept of the university emerged from Christian commitment to holistic formation of persons, not just the transfer of technical skills. When universities refuse to address OnlyFans recruitment on their campuses, they're betraying their foundational purpose. The medieval university system developed from cathedral schools and monasteries. The Studia Generalia, general studies that emerged in the 12th and 13th centuries, saw formation and education towards wisdom and virtue, not just information transfer. Thomas Aquinas, teaching at the University of Paris, understood the professor's role as in loco parentis, standing in the place of parents with responsibility for students' moral and spiritual development, not just their intellectual growth. The ancient Greek philosophical schools operated similarly. The academy, the lyceum, the stoa, these weren't just places to learn theories, but communities practicing a way of life. Plato's academy required students to live together, eat together, and submit to discipline that shaped character. In conclusion, the inscription over the entrance read, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here," but geometry was understood as training the mind toward truth, not just mathematical technique.
Not a mathematical techniques, indeed. So, Mr. Mick, when the article describes a university allowing content creation workshops in dorm common rooms, bright lights, tax strategies for sex work, SEO for explicit content, we're watching institutions abdicate their formative responsibility. What would Plato or Aquinas say about a university that provides the infrastructure and housing for students to commodify their sexuality while administrators look the way?
And they look away, and the Jewish tradition has a concept of education understood as character formation, not mere information transfer. Proverbs 22:6 commands, "Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it." The Hebrew implies initiation into a way of life, apprenticeship in wisdom. When students arrive at university, they're still in formation neurologically. Their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed until age 25. The institution accepting tuition payments has corresponding ethical obligations. The article reveals the economic perversity. Universities charge 40 to 60,000 annually, if not more, creating debt burdens that drive students to OnlyFans, while those same universities provide the Wi-Fi networks and dormitory spaces where the content is created. Then they take and rake in endowment returns while refusing to address what's happening in their residence halls. This is structural evil masquerading as institutional neutrality. Augustine, as Bishop of Hippo, reportedly confronted institutions that profited from exploitation while claiming neutrality. He writes about Roman officials who permitted gladiatorial games while claiming they didn't personally approve. You permit what you do not prevent when you have the power to prevent it. Modern university administrators are doing exactly this. They have the power to ban monetization of pornography in campus networks, to prohibit recruitment activities in residential spaces, and to include this in student conduct codes. Their refusal to act is self inaction, tacit permission. The Desert Fathers developed detailed guidance for those responsible for others' formation. John Cassian's conferences include extensive discussion of the abbot's responsibility for monks under his care. He writes, "The shepherd who sees the wolf coming and does not warn the flock shares guilt for the sheep that are devoured." University administrators see the wolves, OnlyFans recruiters, both corporate and peer to peer, and remain silent out of fear of controversy or accusations of paternalism. But here's where we need to be precise. The article mentions administrators are terrified of Title IX complaints. Title IX is federal legislation prohibiting sex based discrimination in education. How is preventing sexual exploitation on campus a Title IX violation? This is where modern confusion reaches levels of incoherence. The law designed to protect students from sexual harassment and assault is being invoked to prevent institutions from addressing sexual commodification. The classical liberal tradition distinguished between liberty and license. John Locke, whose political philosophy influenced American founding documents, argued that legitimate authority can restrict liberty that harms others or degrades human dignity. Liberty is to be free from restraint and violence from others, but it is not liberty to do whatever you want. Universities have not just the right, but the obligation to maintain standards that protect student well being. The Talmudic tradition develops the concept that the preservation of life takes precedence over almost all other considerations. When students are experiencing the psychological harm documented in the article, 31% increase in anxiety, 27 decrease in percent decrease in life satisfaction, institutional response is morally required. The rabbis taught whoever can protest against wrong and does not is held accountable. What makes this particularly egregious is that universities extensively regulate other aspects of student life in the name of well being. They ban smoking in residence halls, require alcohol education, mandate sexual harassment training, restrict hate speech, and enforce pandemic protocols. These institutions clearly believe they have the authority and responsibility to shape student behavior when health and safety are at stake. But when it comes to an activity causing documented psychological harm and physical danger, they discover a commitment to radical non-interference. The ancient Stoics had a term for this: hypocrisy, literally acting, playing a part. Marcus Aurelius writes, "Hypocrisy is the tribute vice pays to virtue. The hypocrite claims values he doesn't practice." Universities claim to care about student well being, gender equity, and prevention of exploitation, but when addressing these issues becomes controversial, the values disappear. Let's consider what a proactive institutional response would look like, grounded in the formative tradition. First, universities could ban the use of institutional networks for pornography monetization. This wouldn't prevent students from engaging in sex work off campus, but it would signal institutional standards and remove tacit infrastructure support. Clement of Alexandria writes, "The wise teacher removes not just the act, but the occasion for sin." Second, mandatory financial literacy curricula could include honest discussion of the long term costs of OnlyFans, doxing risks, employment consequences, psychological effects, and relationship impacts. This isn't paternalism, it's informed consent. Proverbs repeatedly emphasizes the value of wise counsel. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors, they succeed. Students making life altering decisions at age 19 deserve access to wisdom from those with more experience. Third, universities could actively counteract the economic coercion driving students to OnlyFans by expanding legitimate work study opportunities, increase need based aid, and advocating for public policy that reduces higher education costs. The early Christian communities practiced radical economic sharing. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Universities sitting on billion-dollar endowments while students feel economically compelled towards sex work have lost any claim to moral authority. Fourth, student life programming could include honest discussion of sexuality, dignity, and the difference between empowerment and exploitation. The ancient philosophical schools included regular symposia, structured conversations about how to live well. Socrates spent his life engaging Athenian youth in dialogue about virtue, examining their assumptions, and helping them think more clearly about how to flourish. Modern universities have replaced formation with information transfer, assuming students will figure out wisdom on their own. The article notes that one mother discovered her daughter's study abroad was actually a branded trip to Mykonos funded by 42,000 subscribers. Think about the failure of institutional care that this represents. The university approved the study abroad, presumably with academic credits, while the student was actually conducting an international sex work operation. At what point does institutional negligence become complicity? John Chrysostom, preaching to fourth century congregations that included educators, was blunt. You who teach geometry and rhetoric while ignoring the formation of character are training clever devils, not wise humans. The modern university that provides excellent STEM education while students spiral into anxiety, depression, and sexual exploitation has failed its fundamental mission. There's also the issue of peer recruitment. The article describes upperclassmen hosting content creation workshops, Slack channels with 400 members, and a systemic pipeline normalizing sex work for incoming freshmen. This is happening in university housing using university networks with university knowledge. The ancient principle of subsidiarity, addressing problems at their most local level possible, would put responsibility squarely on residential life administrators to intervene. The classical virtue of courage means doing what's right despite fear of consequences. Aristotle defines courage as the mean between cowardice and recklessness. The courageous man faces the right things for the right reasons in the right way. University administrators who remain silent out of fear of controversy or litigation are exhibiting cowardice, not principled neutrality. What about the argument that university intervention would be paternalistic or infantilizing? The ancient tradition would say that's a false dilemma. There's a crucial difference between treating adults like children and exercising legitimate institutional authority to maintain standards. Paul writes to the Corinthians, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. Part of the formation into adulthood is learning to accept appropriate authority and boundaries. The Jewish coming of age tradition, bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah, recognizes the transition to adult moral responsibility while maintaining that young adults still need communal guidance. The Talmud teaches, make for yourself a teacher, acquire for yourself a friend, and judge every person favorably. The assumption is that even adults need teachers and communal standards, not radical autonomy. In conclusion, when universities accept tuition payments while refusing to address systemic exploitation happening in their residence halls, they betray the formative tradition from which higher education emerged and become complicit in the very harms they claim to oppose.
Mr. Meg, we talk a lot about what's wrong with OnlyFans and sexual commodification, but ancient wisdom is not just about prohibition. It offers a positive wisdom or vision. What does the Christian tradition say sexuality is actually for?
This is absolutely crucial because you can't just critique the counterfeit without offering the authentic. One of the failures of contemporary Christian discourse around sexuality is that we become much better at saying what not to do than articulating a compelling positive vision. But the ancient tradition, particularly in the Song of Solomon and the patristic writings on marriage, offers something gorgeous. Sexuality as sacramental, exclusive, life giving, and fundamentally oriented toward covenant love that images God's love for humanity. Let's start with Genesis. After creating humans as male and female in God's image, the text says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And the man and his wife were both naked and were not ashamed. Notice what's being established here. Sexual union creates a one flesh unity that is exclusive, leaving parents, permanent, holding fast, and characterized by vulnerability without shame, naked and unashamed. This is the opposite of transactional sexuality, which is non exclusive, available to multiple subscribers, temporary, lasting only as long as payment continues, and characterized by performance rather than vulnerable presence. The Song of Solomon celebrates erotic desire with remarkable frankness. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is better than wine. This isn't utilitarian sexuality, it's delight, passion, mutual desire. But notice the context. This is exclusive love between two persons who are committed to each other. The refrain throughout is, my beloved is mine and I am his. There's possession language, but it's mutual and covenantal, not commercial. The Christian tradition develops a theology of marriage as a sacrament, an outward sign of inward grace, a visual participation in invisible divine reality. Paul's letter to the Ephesians interprets marriage as imaging Christ's relationship to the church. The mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. When he calls it a mystery, he's using sacramental language. Sexual union within marriage isn't just a nice human experience, it's a participating in and revealing something about God's covenantal love. Augustine, despite his sometimes criticized views on sexuality, actually developed a profoundly positive theology of marital sex. In The Good of Marriage, he identifies three goods: offspring, procreation; fidelity, exclusive sexual union; and sacrament, the permanent, indissoluble bond that images divine love. He writes, marriage is not merely for procreation, but for the joining of the sexes in mutual society, where sexuality is the expression and deepening of that union. Notice that he's not reducing sex to baby making, he's emphasizing mutual union. John Chrysostom preaches about marriage with remarkable warmth. Marriage is a mysterion of love. The husband and wife become one body, not merely in the act of generation, but in their whole life together, sharing all things. He's articulating how sexual union is meant to express and deepen total life partnership: emotional, spiritual, economic, and social. This comprehensiveness is exactly what transactional sexuality can never achieve. The Jewish tradition adds the concept of companion or lover, emphasizing that marriage includes friendship and mutual delight, not just procreative duty. The Talmud teaches a man should spend money beyond his means on his wife because it is she who brings blessing to his home. There's recognition that the marital relationship, including its sexual dimension, is foundational to human flourishing. What makes this vision so compelling is that it integrates passion with permanence, desire with duty, pleasure with purpose. Modern culture tends to separate these: either sexuality as recreational pleasure, OnlyFans, hookup culture, or its grim reproductive obligation, caricatured religious views. But the ancient tradition insisted on holding together what modernity splits apart. Sexuality is meant to be passionately pleasurable and also ordered toward procreation and also expressive of permanent covenant commitment. The concept of telos, purpose or end, is crucial here. Aristotle taught that everything has a telos, a purpose for which it's designed, and things flourish when they fulfill that purpose. The function of a thing is its excellence. The Christian tradition adapted this. Human sexuality has a telos, and it flourishes when it fulfills that purpose. The telos isn't merely pleasure, though it includes pleasure, or merely reproduction, though it's open to that, but the comprehensive union of persons in covenant love. Thomas Aquinas synthesizes Aristotelian philosophy with Christian theology. The marriage act is good when it serves the threefold good: offspring, fidelity, and sacrament. When separated from these goods, it becomes disordered. Notice he doesn't say sex outside these contexts is pleasureless or without any good. He says it's disordered, aimed at a good and end, pleasure, but separated from the comprehensive good for which sexuality is designed. This has profound implications for the OnlyFans phenomenon. When sexuality is reduced to performance for payment, it's severed from all three goods Aquinas identifies. There's no possibility of offspring, it's digital images. There's no fidelity, the creator has thousands of subscribers, the subscribers have multiple creators. There's no sacramental dimension, nothing is being signified except market exchange. What remains is a hollow simulacrum of intimacy, all the external markers with none of the internal reality. The Song of Solomon includes this warning: do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. The Hebrew is difficult to translate precisely, but the sense is that there's a proper timing and context for erotic awakening. The student who begins creating OnlyFans content at age 18 is awakening sexuality in a context of performance, commodification, and transactionalism. This misshapes the developmental process. You're learning sexual response patterns divorced from intimacy, vulnerability, or covenant. Modern attachment research confirms this ancient wisdom. Psychologists identify secure attachment as the foundation for healthy relationships: the ability to be both autonomous and intimate, to trust and be trusted, to give and receive love without anxiety or avoidance. But secure attachment requires consistent, reliable, non transactional responsiveness. OnlyFans creates the opposite. You learn that sexual engagement is always transactional, that intimacy is performance, that your value is measured in subscriber counts. The patristic writers emphasize that sexuality within marriage serves unification. Gregory of Nyssa writes, "The two become one, not only in bodily union, but in the agreement of their minds, the harmony of their wills, and the blending of their souls." Notice the progression. Bodily union expresses and deepens mental, volitional, and spiritual unity. This is comprehensive intimacy, knowing and being known at every level. The Jewish mikvah tradition, ritual immersion before resuming sexual relations after menstruation, adds another dimension. It's not about uncleanliness, but about renewal, marking sexuality as sacred rather than routine. Rabbi Avra Kaplan writes, "The mikvah reminds couples that sexuality is not merely physical, but spiritual, requiring preparation and intention." Drawing on ancient tradition. This practice embeds sexuality within a framework of holiness, the opposite of commodification. C.S. Lewis, drawing on ancient Christian categories, distinguishes between eros, romantic love, storge, affection, philia, friendship, and agape, self-giving love. He argues that healthy marriage requires all four. Eros without storge becomes mere appetite. Storge without eros becomes mere habit. Both without philia becomes isolation, and all three without agape becomes self-serving. The ancient wisdom is that marriage integrates these different forms of love into a comprehensive union. The practical implication is that maintaining sexual vitality in long term marriage requires intentionality, what the tradition called spiritual discipline. This doesn't mean grim duty, but cultivation, prioritizing time together, maintaining attraction through attention to appearance and health, communicating desires and needs, being playful and creative, renewing commitment through rituals and celebrations. The couples who maintain passion decades into marriage are those who practice these disciplines. Here's the radical claim: the vision of sexuality the ancient tradition offers is actually more liberating than the freedom of commodification. OnlyFans promises liberation, make money on your own terms, be empowered, exercise autonomy, but it delivers anxiety, fear, stigma, and corrupted capacity for intimacy. Covenant marriage, which modern culture sees as restrictive, actually creates the security necessary for vulnerability, the permanence necessary for deep knowledge, the exclusivity necessary for full trust, and the comprehensive commitment necessary for flourishing sexuality. In conclusion, ancient wisdom presents sexuality not as a commodity to be monetized or an appetite to be indulged, but as a sacred gift meant to unite persons comprehensively and permanently in a covenant that images divine love, a vision that's more demanding and more satisfying than anything the marketplace can offer.
Demanding indeed. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, Mr. Nick. Thank you. Dating, desire, and dignity, ancient wisdom on bodies, commerce, and the crisis of campus commodification, how modern campus culture often treats relationships and human worth as a transactions rather than as sacred connections. Mr. Mike, would you like to plug in something?
Sure, appreciate the opportunity. Write the book, grow the business. Connect with me on LinkedIn, GMIC, the Dr. Digital Smith, PhD. Listen to the Dr. Digital podcast, and also pick up a couple volumes I have on Amazon. That's Burning America and On Track, Ian Hunter.
Yes, people must support Mr. Mike, the Dr. Digital, and please do listen to our baby podcast, Mental Health 101. Mental Health 101 is created to empower our mental health awareness. So, Mr. Mike, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you as well. Until next time, stay evolved.
Welcome, people. See you soon. All right, Mr. Mike, we're done with. I think
Kind of breaking up.
Connection. I do have.
There you go. We're back.
Oh, Sir, do